Hi guys, welcome to your first official lesson, an introduction to what earth science is all about. I've met you all already, but this is the first time you're going to be delving into some actual content for this class. So I wanted to give you just a quick intro as to what this is all about this year. So let's start with this image. This is actually an image that was taken about 25 years ago by the Hubble telescope, and it represents a tiny little speck in the night sky. If you could see this with your eye, it would be amazing, but it's an image taken by the Hubble. And every little speck and smudge and little dot on the screen that you see here is a galaxy. And every single one of those galaxies is full of 200 plus billion stars. So we are amongst many, many galaxies out there in our universe. Here's our galaxy. You are there approximately on our spiral galaxy known as the Milky Way. And again, billions and billions of stars all around us in our close proximity in our galaxy. Yet here we are on planet Earth, a very unique and very privileged planet. We are the only planet that can support life as far as we know. And so we are in some ways unique. And that's why this topic of earth science is kind of a cool one. We want to know a little bit about our planet Earth, and that's what you're going to be doing this upcoming year. So what is earth science all about? Well, technically earth science is really a group of sciences. It's a bunch of sciences all mixed together into one single topic. And that's what makes it a little bit challenging. I'd say the only thing challenging about this upcoming year is the fact that there's so much content that you have to learn in just one single year. So it's a group of scientists that are made up of geology, which is really a study of the earth, right? And the things, the processes that are happening on the earth. It's not just about rocks, there's a lot more to it than that. Meteorology, which is a study of our atmosphere. So we're going to be looking at, weather prediction and climate. And then obviously a study of the world outside of our planet. The astronomy is a study of the universe, the stars, and the other planets that are out there. So that's earth science in a nutshell. Now, you might be thinking, well, what is science exactly? Well, science is really what you've experienced all of your life, right? It's this continuous method of getting information about the world in which we live. We're analyzing, we're testing, we're using all this information to answer questions like, why is the sky blue? And why do clouds form? How can we use our resources in a way that's wise for the future? So the idea of the scientific method always comes in place with every science class. But the nice thing about this is now you're in ninth grade, we're not going to be memorizing the steps of the scientific method anymore. We're not going to be going through step by step how to go about doing an experiment. All of that stuff is valid and true, and it's going to apply to this class. But remember, we're not, taking the baby steps now. We're just going to jump right into it. Okay, so there's a little bit of a perk to this class. We can skip over a lot of the introduction stuff. Now, why should you study earth science? Technically, New York State says you must, right? So you could say it's because New York State told me to. But why would New York State say that earth science is a valuable science? Because there's a lot of states out there that actually don't study earth science. A lot of high school students around the US don't study earth science. So why here in New York State? Well, I think the answer to that question can be answered by just simply thinking about, I'll give you an example. When I bought my house, I had to have a house inspection. So a guy came in, he was an expert in house inspections, and he looked around the house and he looked at all the pipes and he looked at the walls and he looked on the roof and he looked everywhere, all over the house. And he said, well, this is good. All this stuff is good. You need to fix that before you can move in here. And so we did, okay, we fixed these things and we had a little bit of an understanding about our house before we moved into it. And I think the same analogy could be true of our Earth, right? Regardless of what you're going to do in your future, you might not become an earth science person, okay? And we'll look at that later. You're going to live here no matter what. Most likely, this is your planet where you will live for the rest of your life. So you probably want to know a little bit about it before you grow up, right? So I'd say that's probably my number one reason for learning earth science, is just to recognize that you are living on a unique and interesting planet, and it's really a good idea to know about it before you spend the rest of your life here, okay? And we're going to look at natural disasters that might affect you, right? We're going to look at climate change that is affecting you currently. We're going to look at natural resources, and we're going to apply some of the lessons of our world to how they fit into your everyday life, because we're going to think globally, but we're going to act in a local sense. Okay, so that's part of our goal as well for this upcoming year. And just to give you some examples of some actual natural disasters, right? Hurricane Laura just happened a couple of weeks ago, hit the Gulf Coast, Louisiana and Texas, and did a lot of devastation. 150-mile-an-hour winds brought in a whole bunch of storm surge, and all that affected those communities down there. And then it kind of made its way through the rest of the country. Now you might be saying, well, I don't live down there and I don't plan on living down there. So let me give you another example. Okay, Hurricane Dorian, before I get to our own example. Hurricane Dorian happened last year. Funny picture in the bottom left there next to my face. That's Donald Trump projecting where he thought the storm would go. He actually added on to the National Oceanic Administration map there in the picture. And he thought it was going to hit Florida, but it actually ended up making a right turn up the coastline. But again, a lot of devastation along the coastline of Florida there. So here's a one that's closer to home. Okay, do we have flooding? Do we have natural disasters in New York State? Well, we don't get hurricanes very often. We get some results of them, but we do get flooding. We get some pretty major storms that do some damage. This is actually a picture that's Governor Cuomo there walking through some floodwaters along Seneca Lake, one of the Finger Lakes. We had a bunch of rain. It was a couple of years ago, probably about 5-6 inches overnight. And it flooded out this little community along Seneca Lake. There were like trailers and houses that were pushed out into the lake that were floating there. Did some major devastation in that area. So we do get these things, and we want to know how do we prevent these? How do we adapt to these situations? Hurricane Sandy was a hurricane that actually came right into New Jersey and New York City. It made a really cool left turn and ran right into the coast. And again, some devastation to us in the north here. Okay, so things happen here in our backyard that we probably want to know about. So one other thing I wanted to talk about just in this lesson is the fact that earth science, because it's so broad, we can consider it really to be a system science. So what does that mean? Well, think about like a transportation system, buses, all this stuff kind of working together to bring you to school. Same is true with the solar system. A lot of interacting parts, right? All these things are working together to affect one other thing. So everything on Earth can be considered that way. One thing happening on one side of the world is going to affect other things on the other side of the world. So especially when we're talking about the weather, small changes in one location will totally turn into big changes in another location. And so we have to study Earth as a system. And that's actually the name of my bachelor's degree. When I went to Cornell, my undergraduate program was called the Science of Earth Systems. And so that just meant that I had to study a whole bunch of information about Earth, and that all kind of blended into one program so that I had a complete understanding of how the Earth worked. So I took lots of different topics and lots of different classes and different topics just to understand the Earth as a whole. So just to kind of wrap up our idea of that system idea is that Earth can be divided into major spheres, right? We said that it's atmospheric science, it's astronomy, it's geology. So these are the major spheres of Earth, and we can kind of treat them in this way. That these are separate things that all work together as a system. So the hydrosphere is made up of all the water on Earth, and that's really what makes Earth unique. We have water in all three forms, solid, liquid, and gas, here on the surface, and there's really nowhere else like that in our immediate surroundings, at least from what we've discovered. The atmosphere is this life-sustaining mixture of gases that, for a number of reasons, preserves life on the surface. Okay, and we'll be looking at that later in the year. The geosphere, you might not think that like the center of the Earth affects your day-to-day life, but it totally does, and we'll be looking at that as well. Okay, the biosphere is something you talked about last year, so we're not going to spend all of our time talking about life. That was living environment, that was biology, but we look at how the Earth affects the life, and so that's our next step in your understanding of science. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is that, okay, you might not become an earth science person, but there's lots of different careers out there that are related to earth science. Meteorology is a really cool topic. If you're interested in meteorology, you have to have a pretty good understanding of math. It's a pretty hard topic, but these people save lives. Just think about the hurricane prediction end of this. That is really important. Seismologists study earthquakes. They do a lot of engineering stuff as well, building earthquake-proof structures or helping to do that. And that's a really cool and interesting field as well. Um, Archaeologists, which is kind of a cool career if you're interested in history, they have an earth science background as well. Okay, so there's just three. Here's another one, random, commercial diver. Kind of cool, right? You can dive underneath the oceans or the lakes and find different things and map out the ocean floor. You need some certification, obviously, but you need a background in earth science as well. And there's a whole bunch of others. I just really touched on the surface, right? You can become an atmospheric scientist. You can become a teacher like me. You can get into engineering. You can be an oceanographer, right? Or a hydrologist. That was what my wife did. And you can become a volcanologist and study volcanoes. There's all kinds of possible careers out there for earth science. But the big thing is understanding that earth science is really a whole bunch of topics all mixed into one. Okay, so hopefully you learned something there, and we're going to have a pretty interesting and fun year, and I hope you enjoyed this first introductory lesson. Thanks.